The lock clicked. Cold. Final. Unforgiving. Leave her there. Alessandro Moretti didn't look back. Not once. Behind that door, Isabella stood in darkness. Complete darkness. No light. No shadows. Just nothing. Her fingers trembled slightly as they touched the wall. Alessandro. Her voice was soft. Not angry. Not afraid. Just confused. But wait. She didn't understand. She couldn't understand. Because just hours ago, everything felt normal. Or at least, normal enough. And now, she was locked away. Alone. Blind. Accused of something she didn't even know. That was her mistake. Trusting him without questions. Outside the room, Alessandro stood still. His jaw tight. His eyes cold. Because in his hand was the phone. And on the screen, one name. Lorenzo De Luca. The most dangerous man in the underworld. A man who doesn't call. A man who doesn't warn. A man who only shows up when it's already too late. But here's the shocking part. He had been calling her. Not once. Not twice. Over and over again. And she never picked up. She had only minutes. Minutes to explain. Minutes to defend herself. Minutes to tell the truth. But she didn't. Because she didn't even know there was a problem. Inside the dark room, Isabella slowly slid down to the floor. Her breathing uneven. Her heart racing. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. But she didn't know. Outside the mansion, cars stopped. Engines cut. Doors opened. Men stepped out. Silent. Armed. Deadly. And at the center, a man stepped forward. Lorenzo De Luca. And he wasn't here for war. He was here for her. And what happened next would break everything. Isabella Moretti always woke up before sunrise. Not because she had to, but because she liked the quiet. Even after she lost her sight, she learned how to listen instead. The faint sound of wind through the curtains. The distant hum of the city waking up. The soft rhythm of her own breathing. "It makes me feel alive," she once said. And she meant it. Because when you lose one sense, you hold on to the others a little tighter. But Isabella wasn't always like this. Calm. Patient. Soft. She became that way. After everything she went through. After the accident. After Alessandro. Before all of that. She was different. Lighter. More expressive. The kind of woman who laughed easily. Who spoke without thinking too much. Who trusted people without hesitation. That was her flaw. She trusted too much. Even when she shouldn't. Especially when she shouldn't. But she didn't know. That flaw would cost her everything. Alessandro Moretti entered her life like a storm. Sudden. Powerful. Unavoidable. He wasn't the type of man you ignored. He didn't blend in. He didn't adjust. He dominated. Every room. Every conversation. Every situation. People feared him. Not because he shouted. But because he didn't need to. His silence was enough. His presence was enough. And when he looked at you, it felt like he already knew your secrets. But with Isabella, it was different. Or at least, that's what she believed. He didn't smile often. Didn't speak much. Didn't explain himself. But he stayed. And for her, that was enough. She loved him. In the quiet way. The kind of love that waits. That forgives. That hopes. Even when there's no reason to. Even when it hurts. Alessandro, on the other hand, didn't love the same way. Or maybe, he didn't know how. To him, love was weakness. Attachment was risk. And trust. Trust was dangerous. In his world, trust gets people killed. So he didn't trust easily. Not his men. Not his allies. Not even his wife. But he kept her close. Not because he needed her. But because he couldn't let her go. That contradiction was something even he didn't understand. She always said, "He's not as cold as people think." But she was wrong. Or maybe she just didn't want to accept the truth. The night everything changed was quiet. Too quiet. That was the first sign. Alessandro was preparing for a deal. Nothing unusual. Nothing new. Just business. Dangerous business. But normal in his world. Isabella wasn't supposed to be there. She knew that. He told her that. More than once. But she went anyway. Not because she was careless. But because she was worried. Because she loved him. Because she had a feeling something wasn't right. That was her mistake. Caring in a world where care is weakness. The deal went wrong. Fast. Gunshots. Shouting. Chaos. Men running. Glass breaking. And then an explosion. Loud. Violent. Blinding. Isabella didn't even see it coming. 1 second. Everything was normal. The next. Everything was gone. When she woke up, there was nothing. No light. No shapes. No shadows. Just darkness. Permanent. And Alessandro. He was there. Standing beside her hospital bed. Silent. Unmoving. Watching. Not speaking. Not comforting. Just there. But something inside him had changed. Not in a good way. He didn't blame her. He blamed himself. But instead of showing guilt, he buried it deep and replaced it with something else. Control. Coldness. Distance. Because men like Alessandro don't know how to carry pain. So they turn it into power. And silence. He paid for the best doctors. The best treatment. The best care. Money was never the problem. But none of that gave her back her sight. And none of that gave her what she truly needed. Him. Still. She stayed. Still. She smiled. Still. She believed. Because love doesn't disappear just because it hurts. Sometimes it grows stronger. Even when it shouldn't. But there was something she didn't know. Something happening behind the scenes. Something quiet. Something dangerous. The phone calls started weeks later. Unknown numbers. No names. No messages. Just calls. At first, she ignored them. Then, she got used to them. They'll stop, she told herself. They always do. That small habit. That simple delay. I'll call back later. She said it again. And again. And again. But one of those calls was never meant to be ignored. Because on the other end was a man who doesn't wait. A man who doesn't repeat himself. A man who doesn't ask twice. Lorenzo De Luca. And he wasn't calling by accident. He was calling because something was coming. Something bigger than Alessandro. Something more dangerous than the life she was already trapped in. But Isabella didn't know that. Not yet. Because at that moment, she was still sitting by the window, feeling the warmth of the sun, smiling softly, believing everything was still under control, believing she was safe, believing her husband would never hurt her. And that belief was about to break. Because downstairs, Alessandro had already seen the number, already connected the dots, already made a decision without questions, without proof, without mercy. And once Alessandro decides something, it doesn't change. But everything was about to change. The phone rang again, sharp this time, louder, like it was demanding to be answered. Isabella paused mid-step, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table, listening, counting. 1, 2, 3. It didn't stop. But she didn't pick up. She just stood there, still, calm, like always. "I'll call back later," she whispered softly. That was her habit. Delay. Ignore. Trust that nothing urgent would break through her quiet world. That was her mistake. Downstairs, Alessandro was already watching. Not her. The phone. His expression didn't change. But his grip tightened slightly. Because this wasn't random. It couldn't be. The same number. The same timing. The same persistence. Lorenzo De Luca. A man who doesn't repeat himself. Yet, he was calling again. And again. And again. But wait. That didn't make sense. Lorenzo doesn't chase. He doesn't wait. He doesn't call. So why was he calling her? And why now? The phone stopped. Silence. But it didn't feel peaceful. It felt wrong. Heavy. Like something unfinished was hanging in the air. Isabella exhaled slowly. Relaxing. Unaware. That silence wasn't relief. It was warning. She turned slightly. Walking carefully. Counting her steps. One hand brushing the wall. Still calm. Still trusting. Still blind, in more ways than one. That changed everything. Because downstairs, Alessandro had already made his decision. No confrontation. No questions. No explanations. Because in his world, you don't ask when you suspect betrayal. You act. Fast. Cold. Final. The phone rang again. This time, different. More aggressive. Almost angry. Alessandro picked it up. Silence. For a second. Then. A voice. Low. Controlled. Deadly calm. You're running out of time. Alessandro's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't respond. Didn't react. Because reacting means showing something. And he never shows anything. But inside, something shifted. Something rare. Something dangerous. Doubt. But he didn't know. That doubt was the only thing trying to save him. The line went dead. Just like that. No explanation. No second sentence. No warning. Just final. And that made it worse. Because men like Lorenzo don't waste words. If he says something, it means something. Alessandro lowered the phone slowly. Thinking. Calculating. Connecting. Isabella. The calls. The timing. The silence. The unknown. And in his world, all of that leads to one conclusion. Betrayal. His jaw tightened. Because betrayal is the one thing he doesn't forgive. Not once. Not ever. Upstairs, Isabella sat down gently. Her hands folded in her lap. Her breathing steady. Trying to ignore the feeling growing inside her chest. That quiet discomfort. That small voice whispering, something isn't right. But she didn't know how right that feeling was. Footsteps echoed from the hallway. Firm. Purposeful. Not rushed. But not calm either. She turned slightly. Listening. Alessandro, she called softly. No answer. Just the sound of the door opening. Then, hands. Strong. Cold. Unforgiving. Grabbing her arm. She gasped slightly. Confused. Wait. What's happening? No response. No explanation. No emotion. Just action. That was Alessandro. Always action. Never explanation. She tried to steady herself. Trying to understand. Trying to feel what was going on. But everything was happening too fast. Too sudden. Too cold. This was the mistake. Trusting that silence meant safety. The hallway felt longer than usual. Each step heavier. Each movement more uncertain. And then, a door. Different. Thicker. Colder. She felt it immediately. What is this place? Her voice trembled slightly. Still no answer. The door opened. Darkness. Deeper than anything she had ever felt. Not just absence of light. But something else. Something suffocating. Something final. And then, she was pushed inside. Not violently. But firmly. Like there was no other option. Alessandro. A pause. For a second. Just one. It felt like he might speak. Like he might explain. Like he might stop. But he didn't. The door closed. The lock clicked. And just like that, everything changed. She stood there. Alone. In the dark. Confused. Breathing uneven. heart racing, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. But wait, it gets worse. Because outside that door, Alessandro stood still, listening, not to her voice, not to her confusion, but to his own decision. And for the first time, something inside him felt off. Not regret, not yet, but something close, something he refused to acknowledge. Because in his mind, he had already decided. She betrayed him, and that was enough. But what he didn't realize was that the truth was already moving toward him, fast, unstoppable, and far more dangerous than betrayal. And that was the moment everything started falling apart. The darkness felt different this time. Heavier, closer, like it was pressing against her skin. Isabella didn't move at first. She just stood there, trying to understand, trying to breathe, trying to stay calm. "Think," she whispered softly. Her fingers stretched out slowly, touching the wall. Cold, rough, unfamiliar. This wasn't her room. This wasn't anywhere she had ever been before. That alone was enough to make her uneasy. But she didn't know. This place was never meant for comfort. It was meant for punishment. Minutes passed. Or maybe longer. Time didn't feel real anymore. Not in the dark. Not in silence. Her heart beat louder. Faster. Each second stretching longer than the last. "Alessandro," she called again. Softer this time. More uncertain. No answer. And that silence felt louder than any response. That changed everything. Because now, fear was starting to settle in. Not panic. Not yet. But something deeper. Something colder. Confusion turning into realization. Something is wrong. Very wrong. She slowly lowered herself to the floor. Carefully. Her hands guiding her. Her breathing uneven. Trying to ground herself. Trying to hold onto something familiar. But there was nothing. No sound. No light. No presence. Just isolation. But wait. That's when she heard it. Footsteps. Outside the door. Different from before. Not Alessandro. Not guards. Heavier. More confident. More controlled. She froze. Listening. Every nerve alert. Every breath held. Voices. Low. Sharp. Urgent. "She's inside. Are you sure?" A pause. Then, "I never make mistakes." That voice. Something about it felt familiar. Not recent. Not clear. But buried. Deep. Like a memory trying to surface. But she didn't know why it felt that way. Her fingers tightened slightly against the floor. Her lips parted. Trying to remember. Trying to connect. Trying to understand. "Open it," the voice said. Calm. No hesitation. No doubt. Authority. The kind of authority that doesn't need to prove itself. Inside, Isabella's heart started racing. Faster now. Louder. Because something inside her was reacting. Not fear. Not exactly. Something else. Recognition. But from where? From when? Before Alessandro. Before the darkness. Before everything. But she didn't know. The past was about to catch up with her. The lock clicked. Soft. But powerful. The door creaked open slowly. A faint shift in air. A change in temperature. A presence. Real. Close. And then, light. Even though she couldn't see it, she felt it. Warm. Sharp. Alive. Her face tilted slightly upward. Instinctively. Like her body remembered something her eyes could not. And then, the voice again. Closer now. Softer. But still strong. "Isabella." She froze. Completely. Because that voice was no longer unfamiliar. It was clear. It was real. It was known. Her lips trembled slightly. Her breath caught. And then, she said it. Barely above a whisper. "Lorenzo." Silence. But not empty silence. The kind that confirms everything. That changed everything. Because now, she remembered. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to know. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't danger. Not the kind she thought. This was something else. Something connected. Something from before. And outside, far down the hallway, Alessandro heard it. Through the silence. Through the distance. Through the truth he wasn't ready to face. That name. From her lips. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. And in that moment, something inside him cracked. Just slightly. But enough. Because for the first time, he wasn't sure anymore. Not about her. Not about the situation. Not about his decision. But that wasn't even the worst part. Because the truth was only just beginning to reveal itself. The moment the door opened, everything shifted. Not just in the room, but in the entire mansion. Because this was no longer control. This was intrusion. Power meeting greater power. Isabella stood still. Her body tense. Her breathing uneven. Because now, she wasn't alone. And somehow, that felt more overwhelming than the darkness. Isabella. Lorenzo's voice softened slightly. Not weak. Not emotional. But different. Careful. Measured. Like he was holding something back. But she didn't know. He had been searching for her for years. Not days. Not weeks. Years. I told you, if anything happens. He paused. Just for a second. I would come. That sentence hit her harder than anything else. Because now, the memory became clearer. Broken pieces starting to connect. A younger voice. A promise. A feeling of safety. Before Alessandro. Before the explosion. Before the darkness. That changed everything. Her fingers trembled slightly. Reaching forward. Not seeing. But searching. And Lorenzo stepped closer. Not rushing. Not forcing. Just there. Letting her choose. That alone was something she had never felt with Alessandro. Choice. But wait. Outside, everything was falling apart. Alessandro stood in front of the monitors. Watching. Not blinking. Not moving. Because what he was seeing didn't match the story in his head. Not fear. Not resistance. Not betrayal. Recognition. Connection. Familiarity. And that was worse. Because betrayal can be punished. But truth. Truth destroys everything. His men stood behind him. Silent. Waiting. Because no one speaks when Alessandro is thinking. And right now, he was thinking too much. That was the mistake. Because thinking leads to doubt. And doubt leads to hesitation. And hesitation is something men like him cannot afford. Boss. What's the order? A voice from behind. Careful. Respectful. But urgent. Because everyone could feel it now. Something bigger was happening. Something they weren't prepared for. Alessandro didn't answer immediately. His eyes still fixed on the screen. On Isabella. Standing there. Not afraid. Not broken. Just connected to someone else. That image burned deeper than anything. She's not reacting like a hostage. The thought hit him hard. Because it didn't fit. Nothing was fitting anymore. But he didn't know. The truth had already entered his house. And it wasn't leaving quietly. Back inside the room, Isabella took another small step forward. Her hand slightly raised. Her voice softer now. How do I know you? A pause. Not fear. Not doubt. Just confusion. Lorenzo exhaled slowly. Like he had been waiting for this moment. 4 years. You don't remember everything. His tone dropped. Gentler. Because he made sure of that. Silence. Heavy. Sharp. Dangerous. That sentence wasn't just information. It was a crack. A fracture. in everything she believed. But she didn't know how deep that fracture would go. "What do you mean?" Her voice trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from something else. Uncertainty. Truth trying to surface. And then, footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Closing in. The door slammed open wider. And there he was. Alessandro. Breathing harder than usual. Eyes darker than before. Presence heavier. But something else was there too. Something new. Something rare. Uncertainty. "What is this?" His voice cut through the room. Cold. Sharp. But not as controlled as before. Because now, he wasn't fully sure. And that alone was dangerous. Lorenzo didn't turn immediately. Didn't react like a man being confronted. Because he wasn't. He was a man who had already won something. Not power. Not territory. Something deeper. "Perfect timing," Lorenzo said calmly. Then he turned, facing Alessandro directly. No fear. No hesitation. Just certainty. "Because you're about to hear the truth." That line hung in the air. Heavy. Unavoidable. And what happened next? No one was prepared for. The room went silent. Not the kind of silence that waits. The kind that presses. Forces. Demands. Alessandro stepped forward slowly. His eyes locked on Lorenzo. Not blinking. Not backing down. Because this was his territory. His house. His control. Or at least, it used to be. "You don't walk into my house and speak in riddles." His voice was low. Dangerous. Familiar. But something underneath it was breaking. Barely noticeable. But there. But wait. Lorenzo didn't react. Didn't flinch. Didn't respond with anger. Which made it worse. Because calm men are the most dangerous. "You locked her in the dark." A pause. Then, again. That word hit hard. Again. Alessandro's expression shifted. Just slightly. But it was enough. Because that word carried something. History. Meaning. Truth. "What are you talking about?" His tone sharpened. But not stronger. Just louder. Like he was trying to regain control. That changed everything. Because Lorenzo stepped closer. One step. Calm. Measured. "And you still don't remember." Another pause. Then, "What you did to her." Silence. Heavy. Crushing. Isabella stood between them. Her breathing uneven now. Her heart racing. Because something inside her was starting to break open. Memories. Fragments. Feelings. Pain. But she didn't know if she was ready to see it. "She lost her sight because of you." The words dropped. Slow. Clear. Final. And everything stopped. Time. Movement. Breathing. Alessandro didn't respond. Didn't move. Because that sentence hit deeper than anything else. And then it started. Flashes. Broken memories. The explosion. The fire. The deal. The hospital. The conversation. The choice. Erase it. Hide it. Bury it. For control. For survival. For power. He staggered slightly. Barely. But enough. Because now he remembered. That was the truth. And it wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. It was ugly. Complicated. Selfish. He didn't just fail to protect her. He chose to control what she remembered. He chose silence. He chose power over truth. And the calls. Alessandro's voice dropped. Not strong anymore. Not commanding. Just searching. Lorenzo answered immediately. They weren't threats. A pause. They were warnings. Another pause. She was trying to protect you. That line broke everything. Because suddenly, every piece connected. Every ignored call. Every silence. Every moment. That call she ignored was her last chance. Isabella's breath caught. Her hand moved slightly, reaching, not toward Alessandro, but away, and that small movement said everything. "I never betrayed you." Her voice was soft, shaking, but clear. "I just didn't understand what was happening." A pause, tears foaming, unseen, but felt. "I trusted you." That word hit harder than anything Lorenzo said, because it came from her, and trust was the one thing Alessandro destroyed. Completely. For the first time, he didn't have a response. No control, no defense, no authority, just truth. And that truth left him exposed. And in that moment, everything shifted. Not outside, not in power, but inside him. Because now, he saw it, not as a boss, not as a man in control, but as someone who made the wrong choice. The worst choice, and lost everything because of it. Everything changed forever. The room stayed quiet. Not the tense silence from before. Not the kind filled with fear or power. This one was different. Still, heavy, final, like something had already ended, even though no one had moved yet. Alessandro stood where he was, not stepping forward, not reaching out, not commanding. Because for the first time in his life, he had nothing left to control. And it showed. His shoulders weren't as firm. His breathing wasn't steady. His eyes no longer carried certainty, only realization. And that realization was heavier than any weapon he had ever held. But he didn't know what to do with it. Because men like Alessandro don't learn slowly. They break, then understand. Too late. Isabella stood a few steps away, still, quiet, but no longer confused, no longer lost, because now she understood everything, not just what happened, but what it meant. "I trusted you," she repeated softly, not accusing, not angry, just stating the truth. And somehow, that hurt more, because anger can be fought, but truth just sits there and destroys you from the inside. Alessandro swallowed slowly, trying to speak, trying to say something that would fix it, something that would bring her back. But there were no words, nothing strong enough, nothing real enough, because this wasn't a situation he could command his way out of. This was consequence, and that changed everything. Lorenzo took a step back, not forward, not aggressive, just creating space, because unlike Alessandro, he understood something important. Choice. He wasn't there to take Isabella. He was there to give her a way out. That difference alone meant everything. "She's leaving." His voice was calm, not challenging, not demanding, just certain. Alessandro looked up, slowly. His instinct was to react, to stop it, to fight, to reclaim what he believed was his. But something held him back. Something new. Something unfamiliar. Understanding. Because for the first time, he saw her clearly. Not as his wife. Not as his responsibility. But as a person. Someone he had hurt. Someone he had broken. Someone who deserved more than control. "She's my wife." The words came out weaker than expected. Not authority, not dominance, just attachment. And even he could hear it. How empty it sounded now. Lorenzo didn't argue, didn't need to, because Isabella spoke instead. "I was your wife." A pause, soft, but powerful. "When you trusted me." Silence. That line ended everything. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. Alessandro closed his eyes briefly, because that was it. That was the truth. And there was no coming back from it. "What happens now?" His voice dropped, lower than ever before, because he wasn't asking as a boss. He was asking as a man who had lost, and didn't know what came next. But she didn't know how hard that moment would be. Isabella took a slow breath. Her fingers slightly curled. Her body steady, because for the first time, she wasn't reacting. She was deciding. And that made all the difference. I'm leaving. Simple, clear, final. No hesitation. No fear. Just choice. That word alone broke something inside Alessandro. Not loudly, not visibly, but deeply, because he knew. He had already lost her long before this moment. This was just where it became real. She took a step forward, carefully, slowly, but certain. And as she passed him, he didn't move, didn't reach, didn't stop her. That was the biggest change of all. Because before, he would have, without thinking, without asking, without caring. But now, he understood something. Too late. Love without trust is just control. And control destroys everything it tries to keep. The door opened. Light filled the hallway. Warm, soft, real. Isabella stepped into it. Not looking back. Not stopping. Just moving forward. Lorenzo followed. Not ahead. Not behind. Beside her. Exactly where he belonged. And Alessandro, he stayed. Alone. In the same room. In the same house. But everything felt different. Because now, there was no illusion left. Only truth. And that truth was heavy. Days passed. Then weeks. The empire still stood. The power remained. The fear still worked. But something inside Alessandro had changed. The part of him that believed control was enough was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar. Reflection, regret, understanding. But the lesson came late. And lessons that come late don't always fix what's broken. Sometimes, they just teach you how badly you failed. But the lesson stayed. But here's the part no one expected. Alessandro didn't chase her. He didn't send men. He didn't start a war. Not immediately. Because for the first time, he waited, watched, learned. And that silence, it wasn't weakness. It was something else. Something far more dangerous. Change. Because men like Alessandro don't stay broken forever. They evolve. They adapt. They come back, different, stronger, colder, smarter. And this time, he won't make the same mistake twice. Somewhere far from the mansion, Isabella stood beside Lorenzo. Safe, finally. But peace. Peace in their world never lasts. Because the past doesn't forget. And Alessandro Moretti never loses twice. But wait. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Because when love turns into regret, and regret turns into power, what comes next is war. Sometimes, one decision changes everything. But sometimes, it creates something worse. So tell me, would you forgive him